Hi everyone, bonjour à tous. I'm Melissa Roy of the TBS Open Government team at Treasury Board, and I'm accompanied by our presenter here today, Mr. Patrick Little, product owner for the Open Government portal. I see we're at 195 attendees right now, which is wonderful. I'm just still receiving some emails of people who are having a hard time connecting, so I'll be responding to those. So Patrick, maybe if we want to start in like a 2 to 3 minutes while people settle in. We're now at 200 attendees. Just to tell everyone, today is an English-only session. We will be transcribing this video after today's recording. So on that note, we are recording today. This is an MS Teams live event, which means you're automatically muted and your video is automatically turned off upon entering the meeting. And the only way that we can interact with you today is via the Q&A live event function that you can find at the top right of your screen. So if you have questions today, please feel free to type them in. Your likeness will not be used within the recording of this video at all, so we won't be seeing your face or even hearing your voice. There's no risk to you in participating today on that front. So just wanted to provide a disclaimer for the recording portion. So we'll be starting in 1 more minute. We're now at 230 attendees. I'm just letting people file in, and we'll be with you right in a moment. And again, thank you so much for being here today and for making this event already a success. It's amazing to see already 240 people filing in. This event was really born from or stemmed from listening to the Open Government Coordinators Working Group Committee that we meet with on a monthly basis, as well as consulting with our Open Government team, or Open Government portal team rather, to see the types of common questions that they receive from the Open Government community. So thank you so much everyone for being here and to help us maximize the success of your uploading of open data and as well as automating it. Today's our first session of 3 training sessions that we'll be offering. So the first is today to kick off Open Government Week. So happy Open Gov Week, everyone. Which is the API session. The second will be held in June. The invite did go out, and you can also find it via our GC Collab page, which is on June 14th. We'll be offering accessibility training within the open government context. And in July, we'll be offering a Open Data Sets 101 type of publishing session, which will also be led by Pat Little. And so if you're interested, you can write me at Melissa, MELISSA .Roy, ROY, at tbs-sct.gc.ca should you wish to join. And you can also head over to our GC Collab page, our Open Government GC Collab page for those links to register. All right, so let's see what the people are saying here. Okay, found it, Elliot, good. Good, Marie-Michelle. Okay, so there aren't too many people who are having a hard time connecting, which is extremely encouraging. So I'll be responding to those emails as I let Patrick begin. So enjoy today's session. I'm just going to queue him up here.
Great. Melissa, can you just confirm you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, and you can see the screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Perfect. So thanks so much for joining, as Melissa said. Today we're going to be talking about using the APIs that we offer on the Open Government portal. Let me just move the slides here. So, quite a bit of content to go over in just a short amount of time that we have together. But overall, we're going to be first talking about some information in general, what are APIs, how to use them, that type of thing. Then we're going to dive more into some specifics around using the APIs for both the public-facing Open Government portal and the Open Government Registry. Getting into the introduction, what is a web API? So in general, APIs are a way, first, they're application programming interfaces, but APIs are generally a way for software applications to communicate with one another. You know, there's different types of APIs. You know, when you're moving your mouse around the screen on a Windows computer, you know, you're using different Windows APIs to communicate. But in this session, we're talking about web APIs. And, you know, at a high level, web APIs are APIs that communicate across the internet. And there's different sort of protocols or messaging standards that you might use for these type of APIs. For example, there's one JMS that is used for Java applications. There's one called MQTT that is used for little Internet of Things sensors and stuff to communicate back and forth. But for this session, we're going to be talking about HTTP-based APIs. When you're talking to like web developers and stuff, this is generally the type of API that they're talking about. So for you guys, the attendees, the community, there's lots of different benefits for being up to speed on APIs. There's benefits to both consuming an API, so just using an API to retrieve data, but also there's benefits to using the API to publish data. One thing to note for when you're working with APIs, you know, there's only so much that we can teach in sessions like this. When you're using a web API or API in general, reading the relevant documentation and then, you know, testing things out is how you're going to come up to speed quickly with this type of thing. In general, yeah, a modern web API is compatible with lots of different tools, extensions. You can use, you know, various third-party services or different programming languages. Throughout the presentation, we'll see just a couple of different examples of that when we go through. So why should departments specifically be using Open Government APIs? So there's a few situations where using the API can be beneficial to manage your data sets or proactive disclosures. So if you need to make a change to many data sets at the same time, you know, using the API will enable you to do that in a programmatic way as opposed to manually editing many things. If a data set that you're publishing on the portal is generated from something like a script running against a database, well, then using an API to update that record on the portal would be super beneficial. Additionally, if you have structured proactive disclosures that originate from another system of record, like if your briefing note title's proactive publication is automatically extracted from your executive communication management system, then publishing that through an API might save you a lot of time each disclosure period messing around with templates. Again, using the API doesn't require an all or nothing approach. So if your department decides, hey, we want to start using the API to update certain high value or high frequency data sets, that doesn't stop you from being able to use the user interface to accomplish the tasks that you are doing right now. Also, APIs can really help facilitate the publication of data from where it exists currently into a centralized location as an enterprise service in the portal. So for Open Government, the metadata catalog that we use is called CCAN. This is both used on the public-facing Open Government portal and on the Open Government Registry. CCAN has an action API, it's called, that can be used to complete tasks, the same type of tasks they would do through the user interface. This software has become pretty standard on open data portals worldwide, like the UK government open data portal, the US government open data portal, Ontario, BC, all of these open data portals are based on the software called CCAN. So for those who might be listening to this presentation after the fact, today we're going to be talking about the APIs as it relates to our specific implementation of CCAN, where we have one instance of CCAN on the public-facing website, and then a separate instance of CCAN sitting behind the Government of Canada firewall, used to manage and update data sets. I know that there's other jurisdictions that have an implementation similar to this, such as Ontario. And so that's the context in which the presentation is today. So the CCAN Action API, this is the API that you're going to use on the portal and the registry, is an RPC style API. So RPC is called Remote Procedure Call. And to use this API, you're going to talk to the API in JSON using an HTTP post request to one of CCAN's API endpoints. Then the API is going to talk back to you in the format of a JSON dictionary. That's for the post request. If you're using API calls where you're only retrieving data, only getting data, you can use an HTTP GET request just like you would with a REST API. So some common uses for the registry, you're going to be you could use the API to do things like publish data sets, to update and manage existing data sets, to manage your proactive publications. Then on the portal, the public-facing website, you would use the API generally to retrieve information from the catalog. So if you want to see, I don't know, how many COVID-19 related data sets did my department publish, that's something that you could get from the Open Government Portal API. Again, we'll see this slide repeated a couple times throughout the presentation. As I mentioned in an earlier slide, reading the documentation is going to be key to your success with the API. Because CCAN is, a fairly heavily used piece of software for open data, the API documentation is quite thorough and well documented. The link here is where you would go access that documentation. So next thing we're going to talk about is the metadata for a data set. Understanding just a few sort of features of the metadata for each record is going to help you understand the key pieces of information that you're going to use to talk to the API with. So if you go on any data set on the portal right now, in the bottom right-hand corner of each record, there's this little box called About This Record, and there's two sort of key pieces of information in there. The first one is the record ID. So the record ID is the unique identifier that the system uses to identify a particular data set record. Obviously, like two departments could create data sets called fourth quarter financial results or something similar. So having this unique ID makes sure there's no sort of collisions between naming. Then the next piece of key information here is that link to JSON format. So if you click that link, you can retrieve the metadata in JSON format, and this is how the API will communicate the metadata about data sets to you, and this is how the system will expect you to communicate, to send the data when you're talking to the API. So actually, if you go on the portal and click one of these links, we're actually using the API call called Action Package Show. And when you click that link, you've actually done your first API call. So congratulations. And then now looking just at the metadata record, so you can see here on the right-hand side, this, oops, I'll go back a slide. Sorry about that. So we can look here. This is the JSON for a data set. And you can see here, this is the record ID, just like we saw on the previous slide. And then all of the metadata that you would typically enter into the system using the user interface is represented here. The JSON format uses a key value pair where each object in the JSON has a name and an associated value. So, looking at some of the examples from here, the first one, success, has the value of true. So there's an object called success and it has the value of true. There's an object called maintainer email and it has the value of open-uver@tbs.gc.ca. So that's the concept of a key value pair. And then in JSON, which is JavaScript Object Notation, I don't know if I introduced the acronym yet. Within JSON, objects can be nested within each other. So for example, you can have an object called keywords that has two different objects within it, one called FR and one called EN, each with some keywords associated with each object. So just wanted to introduce the sort of concept of the key value pairs on how JSON stores information. The next thing to know about the Open Government metadata implementation is we have a full documentation of our metadata that talks about which of the metadata fields are mandatory, what if sometimes in the back end of the system, the metadata elements will be named differently than they are on the user interface. And the metadata that's required for an open data set is slightly different from an open information record. And all of that is documented in the metadata application profile document. And that's a fairly lengthy document, but it goes into detail for each metadata schema. So if you're going to invest the time to start using the API, like understanding which metadata fields are mandatory and which ones are optional and stuff will be important to understand before you do that. In addition to the metadata application in the format of a big Word document, there's also a version in YAML. YAML is a format similar to JSON, and this is the live version of the implementation that is running on the servers at all times. So occasionally people will come and say, hey, I noticed that whatever netcdf or some type of geospatial format isn't one of the options in the dropdown. And when that happens, we're able to quickly update the schema that is used live on the server by changing this code file here. And then we do our best to keep the documentation up to date as well. But if there's ever any delta, this version on GitHub is always what's running on the server. So next, we're going to talk.
Hey, Pat, sorry, can I interrupt? So sorry.
Yeah, definitely.
Just wondering, we have a question here before we move on to the next section. Which version of CCAN are we targeting? The screenshots show 2.6 while the current release is 2.9. I remember that came up recently as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for the question. So on the Open Government Portal and Registry, the Government of Canada is currently on version 2.6. We're hoping to update to 2.8 in the next few weeks. So our development team has been hard at work working on the 2.8 update. And then, yes, some other jurisdictions may be on CCAN 2.9. Luckily, there's not too many breaking changes at the API level between versions. So an API call that you would run on CCAN 2.6 should, for the most part, work on 2.8, 2.9. I'm not aware of any, at least for our implementation, I'm not aware of any breaking changes to the API between 2.6 and 2.8. And as we move forward, eventually, yeah, we'll get on to 2.9, and we'll do an analysis as well to see if there's any breaking changes on the API there as well. Thanks. Is there another question, Melissa, or did we jump on?
That's it for now. Oh, wait, I have two new questions. Oops, getting used to this MS Teams live thing here. Okay. Okay, no, actually, we're good to move forward. Just some people experiencing some difficulties, which I can handle.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. So next, we're going to talk specifically about the Open Government Portal API. So the Open Government Portal API is read-only for 99.9% of users. The portal is, the public-facing API on the open internet. To use the portal API, you do not need an API key. And in the API documentation, you'll notice a list of commands that are called getable. That meaning you can use an HTTP GET request. All of those listed API calls should be available on the portal without having to enter an API key. Now, to interact with those, you can use two different methods. You can use a GET request or a POST request. And the documentation for the API guide will tell you when to use each type of request. Okay, so now we've heard quite a bit of introduction, but how can we actually start using the API? So the Open Government Portal API is available at the URL as shown on the slide. You can do a simple API call right in your browser bar, in the address bar of your browser. So that's one way that you can do it. On the earlier slides, we saw the action package show API call, and that's one that you can definitely do right in the address bar of your browser. You can also use scripting languages, programming languages like Batch, Bash, PowerShell, Python, R. Since the Open Government Portal doesn't require you to have an API key and it's on the public internet, you're much less restricted on what tools you can use to interact with that API. You can use any type of software as a service tool or stuff that you download on a standalone personal laptop. And in addition, there's also a specific command line tool for the CCAN API that allows you to access CCAN instances for doing certain type of bulk operations and other type of API calls. That's another tool that's available to use as well. So now, looking at some of the API calls and what can we do with them? So there's an API call called action status show, and that allows you to get information about the system. It'll tell you what version of the portal that we're using, or of CCAN we're using rather, and what extensions we're using. You can go action organization list, and it'll give us a list of different organizations that publish data on the portal. Action package list will give us a great big list of every data set on the portal. Once you maybe run that action package list command, now you're going to pick out a couple of those IDs and you want to retrieve the metadata for those. You can use the action package show call with an ID specified to get the metadata record for that data set. You can also search for data sets just like you would use the search interface on the portal. So you can use action package search with a question mark meaning query, and then type in something that you want to search for. You can get what data sets have been updated most recently. And there's a bunch of other things that you can do on there as well. As I said before, we're going to see this slide a couple times because I want to reinforce the fact you need to read the documentation. So the full list of API commands is in the documentation. So now we're going to actually start to look at a couple of examples of this to make the session a little bit more interactive. You can feel free to follow along in your web browser or on your command prompt or even on a nice little user interface that I built here. And now we're going to start to look at some examples. So say I want to search for things on the portal related to COVID. So if I just click this, I'm going to run the action package search API call, and I'm going to search for things related to COVID. I'm just going to copy this manually, actually. Like PowerPoint doesn't want to open the browser. Perfect. So as I mentioned, we can do simple API calls directly in the browser. So we can see we put in the URL for the portal's API, open.canada.ca/data/API. Then I can put in my API call called action package search, and I can put in my query parameter of COVID-19. And then, it's going to communicate back to me in JSON. And then I can take this JSON and, modify it or use another tool to analyze the JSON. Yeah.
Hey, Pat, we've received a couple requests to please share those links in the chat if you can. It's a little challenging because it's like a live event Q&A, but if you want to send them to me via our producer organizer chat, I will answer this person's request to add the links if that's possible, please.
Okay. Let me try and send them. That's one. I sent you one, and the second one I'm going to send.
They're coming in. Thank you. I'll post them.
Okay, great. So what we've seen is just one way of doing it, but let's try and do that same thing in another way. So let's fire up old Microsoft DOS command prompt here, and we can do it. We can do it the same. We can do it in the same way. So in the command prompt, we can use curl. So we'll go curl, and we can say request this URL.
So we have a couple comments here on that note. We have someone noting that the page at open.canada.ca, the access our API link, it lists the wrong API routes in English and French in the second last paragraph. And also someone with a helpful comment just saying the JSON viewer extension can help you view a response really nicely as well. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I definitely concur with that second statement. For the first statement, that's something we'll look into after the session. Thanks for bringing it. But yes, you're right. Having a JSON viewer is definitely handy. Yeah, anyway, it's totally handy. So as I was saying, you can do the same thing as we did in the browser using Microsoft DOS. So if I hit enter on this call, okay, now I have my JSON response right here in my browser. And one thing I wanted to highlight from the response is it's when you get your response back, it's going to say a little bit of help text. So it's going to say the API call that you entered. Then it's going to say, was it successful or not? Success true, yes. And it's going to give you a count of your results. So in this first object, there's a result object, and then it has a count of 523. So that'll just give you an indication of how many responses the API got. So those are two different ways to interact with the API. We'll see some more examples later on in the presentation. Just going to get back to the slides. So just talking quickly, I had a chance to pull our API analytics for March. In March, we had about 750,000 API calls on the public-facing portal, and yeah, I think like about 90% or something of those were using this action package show command. So just some information to share. Okay, so now we're going to change gears slightly, and instead of talking about the public-facing API, we're going to talk about the registry API.
Can we answer some questions really quickly?
Yep.
Okay, what do we have here? Are there resources for common schema of the data sets themselves, not the metadata, but the actual data?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So the way we have CCAN set up currently, we don't house data in CCAN. So some departments, you'll know that you'll publish data sets on the portal where the actual data file itself lives on your departmental servers. And then when you publish your metadata records, you're just putting a link into where those files exist on your own server. So in that case, there is no API endpoint. You can't really do anything with the data using the API other than downloading it. Once we move to CCAN 2.8, we're going to be experimenting with offering something called the CCAN Datastore on datasets. Right now, that's the functionality that we use to manage proactive disclosures, the structured proactive disclosure type, where you can upload individual rows into a database. We'll see an example of the data store later in the presentation, and we're excited to hopefully offer that at a data set level in the future. Yeah.
Let's see here. I have a new question. Okay, we have Zach saying most users will not have an extension installed to view these JSON data in a human readable way. Maybe we could talk about some tools that will make it easier, such as browser extensions or the Postman application.
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. So just for the purposes of this call, of this session, I wanted to only use tools that sort of the average government employee will have on their computer. Like when I use the API to do stuff, like this isn't necessarily how I would do it. Like for me personally, if I need to write a report or something, I like to use R. That's my sort of programming language of choice. There's a really good CCAN API library in R. And so if I need to do something like write a report that updates every hour how many CCAN related or how many COVID related data sets exist on the portal, I would write that in R. But I wanted to show in this session sort of the baseline using tools that every Government of Canada employee will have on their computer. That's why we're not going into like things like Postman and stuff. Like, yes, if you're like a web developer, then you'll know those tools, and by all means, like use those tools for sure.
And finally, just someone asking if we have API documentation available somewhere. Do we link to something within the portal?
So yeah, there is an API page on the portal that is really just pointing you though to the general CCAN API documentation. And the slide that I've shown like one or two times at least in the deck so far is the best place to go get the documentation on the API. And next time we get to that slide, I'll even or maybe I won't do that, but if you even just Google CCAN API documentation, like that'll be the first thing that comes up. And just to reiterate, we're on version 2.6 of CCAN, but the API documentation should largely be relevant for at least like a few versions, plus or minus, of 2.6. So if we're good, I'll just get back into the slides. Okay, so next we're talking about the Open Government Registry API. So unlike the portal, the registry API is only available behind the Government of Canada firewall. So you're going to need to be working on a computer that came from work. That's why you may be somewhat limited in the different tools like Postman or other things that were mentioned in what you can use. And the Open Government Registry API will require an API key. And then just a reminder for folks, the registry API is a JSON RPC API, and it supports get and post verbs. So unlike a REST API, many people will be familiar with, the HTTP verbs put, patch, and delete are not used with the CCAN Action API. And we'll go into a couple of examples of that in a moment. So how to use the registry API. So if you don't have an account for the Open Government Registry already, you can register for an account at the link here. Every user of the registry has an API key by default. Oh, I see someone asked the question, how does one get issued an API key? Question answered, every user has an API key by default. To find your API key, you're going to go to your profile. So, just put your username here in the link. And right on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see your API key will be there. So just like the portal, you can do simple API calls on the browser for the registry, and in that instance, if you keep yourself logged into the registry in one tab and then open another browser tab, you won't need to put your API key in. Your authorization will be maintained from the session in your other tab. In that sort of usage mode, only supports GET requests, but you can also use the same type of tools you can for the portal API, such as scripting languages, programming languages, whatever. But as I mentioned, since the registry is only available on GCnet, so behind the government firewall, you're going to be a little bit more restricted in the tools you can just sort of download and play with. And again, there is the CCAN command line tool that is available. So what can you do now with the registry API? So you can use the action package create command to publish a data set. You can use the action resource create to add a file to an existing data set. You can use the action package update command to update a data set. And using this package update call, you're going to need to pass the API the full metadata record in JSON. Or you can use this action package patch API call, where you can update an existing data set, where you only need to give the API the ID of the data set and the metadata field that you want to update. You can delete a data set using action package delete, or you could delete individual resource using the command action resource delete. In addition to these API commands, the ones that we introduced previously from the portal will also work on the registry as well. And as I've mentioned a couple times, the best place to go find the documentation for CCAN API is here on the screen. Okay, so as we showed previous for the portal, we also have some basic API analytics for the registry. This is for the month of March, and we got something like, I don't know, 3,500 API calls in a month. So much less usage of the API on the registry side, and you can see some of the types of calls that users are doing. So package show to get the metadata of a API or of a data set, package paths to update a data set, and some other API calls there as well. Melissa, I see you have questions?
Yes, Melissa has questions and whining children. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, were you asking me something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. We have a question asking is there an option for service accounts if I script up a rig to publish a data set from a continuous integration rig?
Yes, and like exactly what you mean by a service account. Like, could you sign up for a API for a user account and associate that with instead of like it being tied to an individual person, can you make an API account to belong to a service? Yes, and we recommend that for sure if you're going to implement that in a production way. Yeah, that's a good idea. That way, when one of the team members goes to move departments or something, and his credential is tied to the API, yeah, having a generic sort of account to use is recommended for sure. Thanks.
And one more for you. Is there a development or staging instance that integrators can use to work up a script without hitting production?
Yes, I feel like people are already preempting or sort of predicting what I'm going to say. I think this might even be the next slide in the deck.
What a perfect segue.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, so jumping back into it, we have a staging environment that you can use to play around, experiment with your API calls without affecting production. To get access to the registry staging environment, first sign up for an account on production, then send our team an email with your username of your production account, and then we'll copy those credentials over to the staging environment. The staging environment is available at the URL shown on the slide. And yeah, happy to have anyone make use of the staging environment for sure. Okay, so I was a bit slower going through the slides maybe than I thought I was going to be. So I think I'm just going to do one of these demo use cases. So say, for example, go back a slide. So say, for example, we wanted to set up a script to automatically update the date modified on a data set. For why you would want to do this, maybe you have a data set that is being published at an unchanging URL. So maybe this data set gets updated every Monday morning at 9 o'clock, but the URL doesn't change. And we want to communicate to users of the portal that the file has been updated. So what are some steps that we might do to take this on? We could run action package show to get the metadata of, sorry, I meant to exit. Yeah, so we can run action package show on the data set to get the metadata. Then we can set up an environment variable to get the date from Windows into the way that CCAN needs it. Then we can run action package patch to dynamically update that variable. So what does that look like? We will see here. So I'm gonna go to staging for this. One second.
It's always when thousands of people are watching that these things happen.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's only so interesting to watch someone type on the command prompt, but for example, we can go and we can tell the system, okay, show me what's the date. Actually, let me make this a bit better. So, we can run the command echo date to get the date. Then if I want to set it up where we're going to repackage the date into the way that CCAN needs it, we can start breaking down the date into the year, the month, the day. Then we can say, give me the date. Now, so basically all I did there was repackage the date into the way that CCAN needs it. Then I can use the API to update our data set with that date. So what would that look like? So we would use Perl, then registry staging, action package patch. Then we're gonna use the header flag. Then I'm gonna give it my API key, so authorization. That's my API key for right now. I will be resetting my API key, immediately following this presentation. So no need to go in there and try and use that API key. Then I'm going to send some data in JSON format. So I'm going to tell the system that the ID I want to update is this ID here. And then I'm going to say, I want to update the date modified field, but instead of typing it in manually, I want to dynamically fetch the system date, repackage it into this format, and then send it to the system. So I can use that. And then the system will come back to me and say success true, and then print me my my new metadata. Something else we can do is do the same thing, but we'll give it the verbose flag. So if we use that verbose flag, we'll get more information from the system. And we can start to take a look at the actual HTTP request that we sent. So we can see here, yes, we used a post request to this endpoint, and we're saying we'll accept any response back from the system, and here's our API key. Then, you know, the system's going to give us a bunch of information. And then here we can see we got a 200 response, meaning it's okay. And then it will give us our API callback. Okay, so that was fairly time consuming, but we'll go back to the slides. Yeah,
ask
go ahead.
A question? Yep. Are we only talking about querying or updating, et cetera, metadata for a data set, or about the actual data the data set contains? Do I sound natural asking these questions?
No, but that makes sense, right? And so that question was, I think, the same as the question that we just answered second last question ago. So right now, the CCAN acts as a metadata catalog for the portal. So when you are putting information into when you're uploading your data sets and stuff, you're not uploading the data tables themselves into CCAN. And if you are uploading data into the Open Government Registry, if you're using that sort of way to publish, that's just blob storage. So we don't have any sort of information about the structure of the data itself, and we're not serving the actual data sets themselves from the API. That's in our current setup. In CCAN 2.8, we will start to experiment with using the data store to, the CCAN data store, it's called, to serve some of the actual data sets. And then for any data set that's served from the CCAN data store, you'll get an API endpoint where you can actually query the data set itself. And that's a great segue into the next portion of the presentation. I'll go back to presentation mode, and we'll start talking about the data store. And then I'm also seeing another question in the chat saying, do we have a Swagger UI available? Yes, there is a Swagger UI available. I think Melissa might have even posted the link already to it. Yeah, it's at it's on my the only one that we have for the portal is on just my GitHub account. This is just something I did last week to create a little Swagger UI for the Open Government Portal API. But this is something that I would like to build out more of the different API calls in Swagger. But right now, there's a few API calls available, a few different API endpoints available in a Swagger on my GitHub. Link is in the chat. Okay, so last thing, I think the last sort of big topic area that we're going to talk about in the presentation is the data store. And the data store of CCAN provides database storage for structured data. So we use this currently on the Open Government Registry to store proactive disclosures. So for those sort of familiar with day-to-day proactive disclosure stuff, those proactive disclosures where you're uploading an Excel template or using the web form that we offer, those are using the CCAN data store. And you can use the Datastore API to manage your proactive disclosure data in a similar way that you would use the Action API to manage your data sets. So just like for data sets, you're going to post a JSON dictionary using an HTTP post request to an API endpoint, and then the API will also return its response to you in a JSON dictionary. So what are some of the things you can do with the Datastore API? So you can use Action Datastore Search to search for existing records within a Datastore table. You can create or update records using the Action Datastore Upsert command. You can delete records using Action Datastore Delete. And also, if you want to dump a whole table in CSV, you can use the Datastore dump command. So those are just a couple examples of what you can do. So this is one area where we have really good documentation built directly into the Open Government Registry. So if you're on the registry on one of the proactive disclosure types, you may be already familiar with using the import and delete and reference tabs on the page. But if you go over to the API access tab, there'll be really good examples for curl, PowerShell, and Python for each of your proactive disclosure types. So I have a couple of use cases that I highlighted. I know we're a bit short on time, but oops. So I might just explain the use cases as opposed to showing them me typing into the command line. So say, for example, we wanted to copy some data from the production registry into staging. We talked about staging, and you might want to go over to the staging environment to start experimenting with doing some API calls. So maybe one of the first things you would want to do is get some data that you already have in the production environment over to the staging environment. So, for example, you could run the Datastore Search API call to get a JSON dump of all your information. Then you could save that as a file and just take the results portion of that API call, then go onto the staging environment and run the command Datastore Upsert to upload that data. So that's one use case. Then another use case would be to manually clean up some data. So you could do a similar thing where you could use the Datastore Search to get records that matched something that you searched for. Then you could do a cleanup either manually or using a script to clean the data, and then run the Datastore Upsert command again to upload the data into the system. So I'm just going to keep it there on the use case for that. And then I think we're sort of on the home stretch here. So in wrap up, the few examples we've seen today are sort of, really just an introduction. There's all sorts of possibilities for how you can combine those sort of simple API calls. Again, I wanted to reiterate, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing approach when you're using the APIs. So you could still use the user interface to publish data sets, but for certain high value data sets that are going to be updating frequently, then maybe APIs would be a more efficient approach to take. And the API is just sort of one tool we want teams to have in their tool belt. It's not certainly cure for everything, but there are some common problems that we see that maybe the API could help alleviate. And I think that's all I have in the presentation. And so I think I'm happy to take any questions at this point.
I have one in the Q&A, the event Q&A. So does the metadata schema have any integrity fields for the data sets? So digests, checksums, does anything currently prevent linked data sets from getting altered after they get published?
So in the current metadata schema, there's nothing being populated that talks to like a data checksum or something like that. And the way in our current sort of operating environment, many data sets are published, for example, at a static URL on a departmental server. And then the metadata, unfortunately, isn't updated as frequently, for example, as the data set is. So we're hoping that this, starting to socialize the fact that we have an API, the fact that, it's not impossible to learn how to use, we'll start to have folks that are publishing in that model start to update their metadata more frequently. And that there are non-mandatory fields that could be used sort of in that way. One of them is file size. So there is a metadata element called file size, and that's one. I mean, maybe not as robust as, for example, a checksum, but something like putting the file size in there might be one way.
That's the only question I have for now. Maybe we'll give it a couple minutes. Or did you also have annexes, Patrick, to show, or is that it for today?
Nope, that's it.
Okay.
But I know that we're not fully out of time. Like we're booked until noon. So maybe as the questions aren't rolling in super quick, I could take some time and show the Swagger UI. That might prompt some questions. So for those that aren't familiar, Swagger UI is actually the old name of what's now called the Open API specifications. And this is just a way to make sort of easy like user-friendly API documentation. I'll put the link in the chat again. And so some of the commands that we talked about in the presentation, for example, action status show, you can use this in an interactive way to do that command. So if I click action status show, I can see that it's going to be a GET request as opposed to, say, a POST request, like we've heard about. And then if I want to try that out, I can just click try that out. And this API call takes no parameters, so I don't need to give it any other information. and click execute. And I'll just zoom in a little bit. So I can see it sent this request from my browser. So it's a GET request to this endpoint. And I told the system I would accept any type of response the system gives back to me. And then I can see, here's the response from the system. It's saying, you know, success equals true. And then it's saying CCAN 2.6.9 is the version we're on. And then this is the URL. And, you know, these are all the different CCAN extensions that we use on our system. That's just one example. And I'll go through a few more, just because this type of Swagger UI is fairly user-friendly to go. So say I want to do this action package list command. I can see it's a GET request, and I want to try it out. And here I can put in some parameters. So I'm going to leave this at the default, but so action package list will give us a list of all the IDs for the data sets on the portal. And, you know, I think there's over 80, close to 90,000 data sets. So maybe I don't want to get them all. So I'll just tell the system, give us a limit of 100, please. And if I want to execute that, you know, click execute. And then I can see here in more detail, this is exactly what the request looks like in curl. Then I can see the response, and it says, yep, true. And then here I can see my list of data sets that are returned. So now, like, you know, let's use this as a bit of a use case. Let's say, okay, what is this data set here? 0041, you know, let's see, what is that? So I can go down to the action package show command and say, I want to try this out. And then instead of using the default ID that's already in there, I can say, I'll put in that ID that we saw from our previous call. Click execute, and then it's gonna show me, okay, this is I don't know, it's lot 306 to 1036, lanes, greenbelts, and roads of the Porter Creek subdivision. And, you know, interesting. And I can see all the metadata associated with that particular data set. And, you know, there's a few other examples of API calls here that are documented. As I mentioned, like this is just something that I put together last week. Just I thought it might be useful in support of this session, but not everything is built out in here. You'll notice that only the GET requests are currently documented in this Swagger. I hope to take a bit of time and add more of the post requests to this. And then eventually to incorporate something like this directly on the portal, so that, you know, the official documentation doesn't live on my GitHub. Eventually, it should live like on the portal, where, you know, it's findable for users.
All right, we have some questions filing in now to keep you busy.
Okay, awesome.
Okay, so if I publish a data set as a CSV file, is that data queryable through API, or to get that functionality, you need to publish data in JSON format?
So, good. Hearing a bit of echo. Seems to be fixed now. Perfect. So that's a good question, and we've tried. Maybe I haven't been clear on explaining it the other couple times. So right now, the way that CCAN is set up on the Open Government portal, the only information that you can get from the API or change using the API is metadata. Other CCAN portals in the world, like worldwide, do have the ability to interact with the actual data sets themselves using the API. And that's something that I'd hope that I hope that our portal will be able to offer in the future. I mean, we can even like look at an example. We go to the Ontario Open Data Portal. Click search, find case status of COVID-19 cases, and I'll go to this CSV file. Click preview. Here, they're displaying the data directly on the page as opposed to only as a file download, and they have you know, a data API that you can query that actual data set itself. So this is something that we'd like to offer in the future, and we think that that will really help drive API adoption once that's done. There'll be many. We think that it'll, I don't know, at least socialize the fact that we have APIs available, since there will be a little nice data API button on each data set that is usable from the API.
Thank you, Patrick. Next question. If I were setting up a database that could someday be accessed via an API in an open or department data store, are there best practices that I should follow?
That is a really good question, and the answer is yes, of course. And unfortunately, you know, I don't have all the information sort of fresh in my head about all the best practices that we should handle, that you should consider when doing that in my head today. But we have an upcoming training session. I forget which date, but it is going to be specifically around publishing data sets. You know, so what are some of the best practices on publishing data sets, thinking about sort of everything from the structure of the data set itself to what sort of system and tools that data set would live in. So hopefully, you know, you enjoyed this session, and we can convince you to come to the next session, where I think we'd be able to talk more fully about that.
Thanks, Patrick. I will send them, remind the link for our GC Collab space as well, where we'll be making that announcement for the date and the details for that session in July. Oh, we have Bruno saying, thank you, Patrick and Melissa, very informative and useful. I'll say what I tell my children. Merci de dire merci. C'est important. Merci. I bet you that's Bruno Fortin. So nice. Next question. Do your plans for the CCAN data store include eventually hosting all GC open data, or is the long-term plan only to host some of them?
So that's a great question, and I think to start with, there's a few considerations, I guess, that we need to take. Firstly is size. So I don't think the CCAN data store would be appropriate for, you know, truly big data sets. If we're talking, you know, in the sort of maybe above like multi-10 gigabyte type of thing, you know, it starts to get a little bit too big for that application. So that might not be appropriate. Also, the data needs to be of high quality. So if you were to take a random sample of just the CSVs that exist on the Open Government Portal today, I think you would find a high percentage wouldn't be considered high quality CSVs, in that they don't have consistent numbers of columns across all rows. They have, you know, the wrong type of headers in them and stuff like that. So before you publicly expose those data tables as a queryable API, just some of the basics need to be tackled first. So we'll be prioritizing which data sets we roll that out to, based certainly on ones that are of sufficient quality that they meet at least the basics of what a tabular data set should look like. I forget if there's anything else in that question.
We have another. If we have data sets being published to the federal geospatial portal, is that a completely separate API? Are there special considerations for this situation?
Yes. So when you publish geospatial data using the FTP catalog, so there is an API behind the scenes that NRCan uses to take your data from the federal geospatial platform and then push it onto the Open Government portal. That's using the same CKN API that we talked about here today. Now, does Natural Resources Canada also offer an API for you to manage your geospatial data? I'm not 100% sure actually about that system's API, so I can't speak to it today with any sort of authority. But that's something that'd be a great question for the FGP group.
And we are tallying these types of questions as well, so we'll follow those up for the community. What else? Do we have any API that lets us know how many times a data set has been accessed?
Good question. So the answer is no and yes. So firstly, through the CKN API that we've been talking about in this session, the answer is no. Web analytics data is not held within CKN, so there is no place in the system to go and query that. So that's sort of the response for any folks who aren't in the Government of Canada who might just be stumbling upon this session at a later date or whatever. For folks in the Government of Canada, we use Adobe Analytics as our web analytics collection tool. And that's an enterprise service that's offered through Service Canada in their principal publisher group. So all of your web analytics are available in that Adobe tool. That Adobe tool does offer an API. And so, you could presumably query that API. You would have to contact principal publisher to get an API account. But so, for example, I've done that. And as I was mentioning, like R, for example, the programming language R has a good CKN API wrapper, like a way to use the CKN API in R, and it has one for Adobe Analytics. So I was able to write some basic API-driven analytics reports that used our Open Government Portal API and used the Government of Canada's Adobe Analytics API to make some analytics reports. So the answer is yes, if you have an Adobe Analytics account and want to get access to that from principal publisher. So sort of short story long there, but all things are possible, when you have APIs in your tool belt.
Thanks, Patrick. We have a question from Omar. I know that some people are dropping off right now, so I just wanted to take the time to thank everyone for joining us today. I hope that you guys found this helpful, and we're open to any feedback that you have to give us as well, given that this is the first in a series. So any feedback that you might have, you can send to moi, Melissa Roy, MELISSA.Roy, ROY, at tbs-sct.gc.ca so that we can optimize these sessions for you. So thanks so much to everyone who's able to make it. We have 10 minutes left of questions, and we really want to take advantage of that time as we foresaw that there would be a lot of questions today, so we're happy to. Omar, can we leverage this work to build our internal metadata and data management solution? We want our analysts to be able to find and access curated data/data sets to perform analyses. How scalable is this?
That's a super interesting question, and difficult to sort of pontificate generally on all use cases. But for example, CCAN is a metadata catalog, and this is really, the core use case for CCAN is getting a list of metadata and data sets and providing a searchable interface to manage those. So, CCAN is a good use case for that. In terms of having your analysts, go there to find curated data sets. I think it's quite scalable in terms of size. The Government of Canada Open Data Portal has over 90,000 data sets in there. And so it's certainly scalable to that level. Yeah, I think I'll just leave it there.
Okay. Okay, another question from Anonymous. I might have missed this. What is the process to publish the data on behalf of my department? Should we have a department account? So that's a whole other thing, I guess, in terms of the data set publishing on the Open Government Portal. So we can include that in, I have a one-pager that I can send people following today's session. Given the current limitations of how the GC uses CCAN, I'd be interested in using the CCAN API to automate downloads of all the data records from the various GC servers, and then use R or something to look over the locally downloaded data sets. Do you think that would be feasible given the size of data sets the GC is currently publishing?
The answer is yes. I think that would be totally feasible, but you may want to target that slightly. I don't think it would, make a lot of, or maybe it would make a ton of sense. Maybe you wanted to do something like create a list of how big each file associated to each data set is. So you want to use R or Python or whatever to loop over the list of all the data sets, download each file, figure out how big the file is, and add that to a list. Sure, that would be something that would be totally possible. Just sort of based on my experience running those type of scripts, that would probably take like a day or so to run in the background. So keep that in mind. Whereas if you were to do it with more of a targeted collection of data sets, then it would probably take like a minute or 30 seconds to run. So something to consider, but many things are possible for sure.
Is your API data store the same to the API store on the Canadian Digital Exchange platform?
So no. When we talk about the CCAN data store, we're talking about something very specific to CCAN, which is an extension that allows CCAN to display tabular data, to store and display tabular data. In terms of the Canadian Digital Exchange platform, there may be something else called the data store in there. I'm not sure. Sorry, just rereading the question. The API store on Canada.ca, that's something different. The API store for the Government of Canada is a place where departments can publish APIs they own. So if you have a specific API that you maintain and publish, you can make it findable to the public using that API store. And in order to onboard your API into that platform, there's some requirements. But again, like the focus of today's presentation was specifically around the two different APIs for the Open Government Portal, the Registry API and the Portal API.
Thanks again. If you had one takeaway thought, what's the benefit of using the OG API to upload your department's data?
So one takeaway, I got a few different takeaways. So if you are scripting a data set that gets generated every month, every week, every day, using the API allows you to, one, make sure that the metadata is up to date. But if you're going to go to the trouble to create an API call to update the metadata, you might as well at the same time upload that file directly into the registry. Then we can serve it from our cloud storage. That will also get you ready for when we're able to offer the data store to data sets, so that you'll have a public-facing API endpoint on that data. So we're still seeing some issues on the portal where some data sets are not in HTTPS yet. Some departments that are hosting data on their own server haven't configured HTTPS, so that when users click to download a data set, they're having significant issues with modern web browsers like Chrome blocking non-secure links, and users aren't able to access their data. So if you are able to update the metadata with an API, take the extra step, upload it directly into the registry, then you can be sure that you won't have any issues with HTTPS, certificates and stuff. We'll handle that through the registry. Thanks.
You're amazing for taking the time to answer all these questions, but it really proves that there was a need for this session today. So 2 minutes left, 2 questions left. So I think we'll cap off at these last 2 questions. Of course, if you had any more questions for us today, you can send them to either myself, Melissa Roy, MELISSA.Roy, ROY, at tbs-sct.gc.ca, or to our generic Open Government inbox, which both Pat and I have access to, at open, OPEN-ouvert, OUVERT, at tbs-sct.gc.ca, and we're happy to compile your questions and get back to the community once we can also share the recording of today's session. So before last question for you, Patrick, today, I'm sure you need a glass of water or something after all that talking. This record gets updated monthly, Pat, if you wanted to refer to a link that it's an open.canada.ca portal link. So this record gets updated monthly. Can an API be used to easily update the file? Data file resources, that's a really common question in our community, and something that we would want the community to use APIs for is that automation of the updating.
And the answer is absolutely yes. That's what I would hope, that yes, you can do that. You'd want to use the command, probably you'd want to use the command action package patch to pass a partial metadata record, and then just upload the file directly into the registry. So yes, 100% possible. Actually, the example that I showed didn't upload a file, but it did modify a file, so very, very similar.
Thanks again, Pat. And our last question for today, if that's okay with everyone, again, please feel free to reach out to us with your questions. To Sinam's point here, who thanked us for a great training session today, Patrick and Melissa, great way to inform departments about this powerful tool to help manage and improve the quality of dataset metadata. I have to give kudos to my colleague Pat here. This is really more so his wheelhouse, and for my end, I coordinate and lead our Open Government committees. So it was really in response again to the committees and having our ear to the ground, seeing what people really wanted to hear from us. So I'm really happy that you guys found it helpful today. It's really proof that we're in the right direction. So that's a really good feeling. And maybe we could explore a more in-depth session in the future as well. Pat, if you're up for it, no pressure. Last question. Is there any relationship with your platform based on CCAN data management system and the API store?
At a high level, no. No, the Government of Canada API store isn't like intrinsically linked to the Open Government APIs that we have at all. No.
So that's just a big no.
Other than, I mean, we know the team that manages that group, and we collaborate together on API standards and things like that. But in terms of like a practical integration or anything, no.
Okay. Pat, I mean, this is the part, I guess, where we thank everyone for joining us today. Again, I just want to reiterate that we are so very grateful for your participation today. Please follow us on our GC Collab space for more events like these, the Open Government GC Collab space. Again, there is an accessibility training on June 14th within an OG context, of course. If you're interested, please check us out again on our GC Collab space or write to me directly, Melissa at TBS. I wanted to thank also Pat, our amazing presenter, who took a lot of time to go through everything in depth today and answer a lot of questions, as well as to everyone for taking the time to ask questions. Sometimes it's a lot of information to take in, so if anything comes to mind, please feel free to write us after today's session, and we'll also be sharing the recording as well as the presentation for today's training session. So thanks again, merci à tous. Please know that we will be transcribing this session to French. Avis aux intéressés francophones, bien sûr. Si vous souhaitez faire part ou participer à cette séance de formation en français, nous allons en fait la faire transcrire en français et l'offrir et la partager à la communauté aussi. Donc, un gros merci à tous. Thank you so much to everyone from the TBS Open Government team. And yeah, with hopes that you found this helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks.